Uh, so only just started. And myself, I'm Sam Rice. I'm a parent from Largs. I'll talk a bit about my story, how I ended up getting involved in all of this, and I'll focus on the solutions and things we can do as parents and as community leaders and educators. So without any more blethering, I'll hand over quickly to a few words from Councillor Todd Fergusson. Thank you. Oh, we've got a slide. You won't need this.
No, I won't need that. Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along on a fairly cold evening. My involvement in this really is as an elected member, and just before the summer recess, I brought a motion to North Ayrshire Council where I asked for the council officers to review the mobile phone policies around the school estate. And I did this for two reasons particularly. Firstly, the current mobile phone policy in schools is determined by individual head teachers. So there's no uniformity across the school estate, and we wanted to bring that more into alignment. And the second reason really is that school has changed dramatically since I was a young person at school back in the 80s and 90s. And there's far more digital disruption in young people's lives that they have to navigate. And we know that this can lead to increased levels of anxiety and stress, bullying. Digital media is 24/7, 365 days a year, so there's no escaping from it. So what we need to do is make sure that our policies are reflecting that. And it raises some really important questions about, are the policies that we've currently got sufficient to tackle the problem? Not only tackling the mobile phone use in schools, but outside, so that young people can navigate the digital world as well. And importantly, are we empowering schools and parents to be effective in setting some clear boundaries? It's not always easy to do, especially when you start looking at the fact that if you are removing mobile technology from young people, they could essentially be ostracized by their peers because they're not following the kind of current trends. And again, from an elected member's point of view, what can we do at the local and national government level to try and implement some of these changes? And there's a few international examples that have taken the mantle on. In France, in 2018, they brought in mobile phone policy in primary and lower secondary schools. They've just recently extended that because the pilot was so successful. And what they've seen is more focus in the school estate, better academic attainment from the students, particularly students that were struggling before. So really good learnings coming out of that. And in Finland as well, they've just recently implemented a mobile phone ban across the school estate as well. And the primary reason was to bring some calmer and more focused classroom experiences. And they've really noticed increased chatter amongst the young people since the ban's been in place. So we're getting a lot of plaudits on that front as well. But I guess the important thing here is we can't vilify digital media or technology. I made a career out of it. I worked 20 years in advertising, so went from traditional print media through to digital media, and then with the advent of social media as well. There's some really good positive interactions that we can get out of it for a range across the range of interactions. And I had many conversations with clients about the benefits of connecting and reaching new people through social media. So there's definite benefits, but I think fundamentally it comes down to how that is managed particularly amongst young people. And just to focus on the young people in the audience as well, when I brought the motion through the council, I was very strong in my recommendations that the young people had to be part of the conversation in developing the policy moving forward, because ultimately it's about their life and experiences through the school estate that we're trying to improve, and they have to come with us on that journey as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panel, but just a brief snapshot of what we can do at a local government level as well. So thank you very much for all coming along, and I'll hand back to Sam now. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Todd. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next up, Stephanie Gillespie. I forgot to say at the beginning that we'll have people speak for sort of 10 to 15 minutes each, and then at the end there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers and a bit of a discussion. So Stephanie, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it just on here?
Oh, there's a slide clip here. Hopefully.
Okay.
If you click that, it should change for you. So try.
Okay. Okay, this feels do I need this? Do I need this? Yes. This feels really nerve-wracking. I'm so used to sitting in my own consulting room with 1 or 2 people in it, so speaking in front of everybody seems quite anxious. I'm Stephanie Gillespie. I'm one of the GPs that works at Cllr. I'm not really sure how I've kind of come across this. I think it's Yvonne Brodie, who's another local GP who's here, kind of got me into this. So I didn't really come across the dangers of early smartphone use in kids through my work or through my own kids, really. It was just more information was circulating about it. But it's something that jumped out. I've got a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. So for my eldest, it's kind of coming to that age where we might be having these discussions now, but also back in 2013, I did a peds job in Crosshouse, and that was my first encounter of dangers with smartphones. There was a girl who'd come in and taken a paracetamol overdose, and I couldn't figure how she would have found that out, but she found it out on her phone. And then I was on a night shift and I walked past her and she was still sitting on her phone. And that was the first time I ever kind of came across kids being impacted with the dangerous stuff that they can come across online. And then I've been at Cllr for 8 years now, and there's been a massive upsurge of mental health presentations in kids, and there's only so much that we can do as GPs for that. And a lot of our job is to do with prevention rather than cure. So you hope by introducing the dangers or information on the dangers that people can make informed choices about what they're doing with regards to smartphones with kids. So the ownership of smartphones is becoming the norm in younger age groups, which is quite concerning. There is a real underestimate of the risks and an overestimate of the benefits, and that's all coming from these companies who are promoting tech in kids at younger ages. There's growing evidence that there's links with early and excessive screen use, including smartphones, with negative outcomes emotionally, cognitively and socially for kids. And we know that the rates of depression, anxiety and suicide in young people has increased since 2010 when smartphones first were born. Data shows that the younger you get your smartphone, the worse your mental health is. And today there's no government level intervention, and I think that becomes really difficult for parents, for teachers, and for GPs, because you can't tell someone not to have a smartphone, do you know? A lot of these slides are just information about the risks of smartphones and then how that impacts on mental health. So the kids' brains are continually developing. So when they're young, they've got a well-defined limbic system, which is very responsive to risk and reward. But that prefrontal cortex, so the part of the brain which has to do with emotional regulation and controlling impulse, that continues to develop up until the age of 25. So their wee brain isn't programmed to deal with all the things that they're exposed to. They've also got very sensitive dopamine-driven reward systems, which smartphones and the apps that you can access in smartphone feed off of, and that's what app designers kind of aim to utilise. And excessive screen stimulation and smartphone use can interfere with the kind of normal pathways in the brain about reward. And we know that smartphones take advantages of this, and we know that app designers use these pathways and consider these pathways when it comes to app design. Another part of it is the opportunity cost. When kids are sitting on smartphones, what are they missing out on otherwise? And that has a massive impact on their mental health. There's the loss of other potential gains and other things that they could be doing. There are some kids' smartphone use is the equivalent of a full-time job, and that's including education and all the other things that they should be exposed to. And actually, when it comes to, when you start to consider the reward systems in their brain, it's a massive responsibility for them as well, or it feels like a massive responsibility to respond and to react, and because there's always these notifications. And research suggests that 1 in 4 children or young people have problematic smartphone use. There's also a huge impact on their kind of social growth, which again has an impact on mental health. So we know that the number of children who are playing with their friends on a regular basis has dropped after 2009. They're more likely to suffer depression and anxiety for various reasons. And the time that they are spending together is negatively impacted because there's not that same connection, because there's always that distraction of the phone in the background. There's also the group level effect of it as well. So it's not just impacting on the individual themselves, but a change in culture for all kids. And we know that that's recognised in schools. And then when the phones are eliminated from schools, it changes the culture of the school. So that's the same for friendship groups, and it's the same for families. They've become a substitute for face-to-face interactions and that connection that kids can have with friends. We know that kids are feeling more isolated. We know that the feeling of loneliness has doubled since 2012 in kids, and there's actually evidence to suggest now that kids they've kind of lost the ability to interpret facial cues because there's not that same interaction, face-to-face interaction anymore. Screens and smartphones have a massive impact on sleep, and we know even before the introduction of screens and smartphones that sleep had a massive impact on mental health. So, all of this just feeds into we know that the blue light from screens or smartphones suppresses melatonin production and delays sleep onset, and therefore interferes with their circadian rhythm, that normal rhythm that tells you when to sleep and to wake. We know that screen use before bed is strongly linked to poor sleep quality, and I think a lot of this is down to the 24/7 access to smartphones that means they can lie in their bed, or if they wake up during the night they can check their phone, and it just completely breaks that natural cycle for sleep. We know that poor sleep is associated with poor concentration, poor focus. It can impact on learning, reaction times, decision making, poor motor skills, and therefore impacts on kind of increase in accidents as well. Kids are more irritable and anxious. There's increased anxiety and depression levels, aggression, lack of impulse control, and relationships suffer. And as I said, the ease of access to a smartphone is one of the key things here. You can go down rabbit holes and go down different tangents about screen time and all these other things. When it comes to smartphones and kids, it's that 24/7 access that they're never getting away from it. And there's quite a good advert advert for it, I suppose you would call it that, of a kid getting put to bed with the smartphone in his room and his dad saying good night. Has anybody seen that one? Yeah, and he's saying like, big pile of pornography, just ignore that. Or your school bullies, just ignore that. Do you know, it's all there, it's all in that smartphone, and they can't get away from it. Their attention's also impacted on as well. There's a never-ending stream of notifications and interruptions. With heavy smartphone use, there could be notifications up to a minute, one a minute. And I've got colleagues who say that their kids who are in a bedroom above them and their phone's on the floor, they just hear it buzz, 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 buzz all night, to the point that their phone runs out of battery overnight because there's so many notifications, it keeps it on. This distracts kids from kind of engaging in other real world activities, and that connection that these other activities bring. It impacts on their brain development because the repetitive use of a phone, it then interferes with the neuronal pathways, and if they're using them more, it essentially just carves it that bit deeper. And it's that reference to kind of TikTok brain, where they can't stay concentrated on one thing. It's continually moving from one thing to another, and their concentration won't hold for very long. And all of this can interfere with the skills that are essential for executive function and the things that you need to be able to do as an adult to kind of survive in society. Smartphones and the apps are all very cleverly designed to capture a kid's attention. They don't stand a chance. They're just too little. And the whole purpose of that app is to to keep that kid on that app, and the more stimulating and the more engaging that app can be, the more kids they'll have and the better that app will do. And that's all got to do with the advertising and the other gains that app's got. Their primary concern is not the kids. And I think a big part of it is that there's no time for a kid to sit with their own thoughts anymore. Do you know, there's just constant distraction. And there's no importance of presence. They don't sit and there's no reason to be bored. There's no reason to be kind of mindful anymore, because there's just something else that's there to engage you. There's also kind of an addiction aspect of it too, just because of the kind of hooked model that they've got. The notifications become triggers. The triggers, then there is then a reaction to the trigger, or an action to the trigger, which leads to kind of a pleasurable event. And that's when Facebook introduced likes, Twitter introduced retweeting of messages so that there's kind of gain there, there's perceived gain and kind of achievement. And there's not always that gain, so they will invest time into it, but they might not get the same likes, but that just fuels that drive for more and more and more. And it's those, when they're seeking out that, it's the dopamine levels that are continually going up and up and up until that reward is pursued, and it's that dopamine effect that's then sought out. And there is no signal for these kids to stop. None of these apps will say that's enough. And their brains can't say stop either, because they've not got that same prefrontal control. It is just a form of operant conditioning that we've been aware of for a very long time for lots of different things. And this model is particularly worrying because a lot of these apps on social media and on smartphones that they can access via smartphones, they invest a lot of themselves in it, and therefore when they're not getting that reward back, it feels very personal to them. And it's back to the same thing of the smartphones provide 24/7 access to that, which is really, really difficult. And we also know that if kids are taken away from it, and there was a recent survey that was sent round by North Ayrshire to explore it, that it can impact on their anxiety and their mood when they're taken away from the phone as well. So it's not like just take it away and they'll feel better. There can be that constant draw to it. There's also a real concern regarding the content that kids are exposed to as well with it. And there's the access to social media and what it's got, but also unrestricted internet access potentially. And there's no way of keeping track of what kids are seeing. And you're also starting to hear stories of kids who don't have smartphones, who are then being held down in a phone held in their face so that they're forced to watch something that they don't want to see. Research suggests that over 25% of 11-year-olds have been exposed to some form of pornography as a result of a smartphone, which is often violent or non-consensual. And if there's no way of knowing that they've seen that, then there's no way of kind of evaluating that with them or going over that with them. And their brain just can't program any of that either. I mean, I don't know how I would deal with seeing anything like that, let alone a young person. There's also a massive amount of visual social comparison, which we know has a massive impact on girls more than boys, although I have seen numerous patients in the practice with kind of body dysmorphic features where all they're doing is comparing themselves to these real people that they're seeing on social media, and they're not real, but there's no disclaimers there, they don't know. And it's very sad, and they've actually been boys, not girls, which has been quite interesting. There's also trolling, reputational destruction, cyberbullying, which we know 84% of it, well, 84% of all bullying is via the internet, and it all fuels the insecurity of adolescence, which we know has always been there, and they just can't get a break from it. The algorithms now feed into this and are manipulating the content. And we know now that 18 to 24-year-olds will have been brought up with a smartphone. And if they are now going on to have children of their own, then there isn't that, oh, well, when I was a kid, my mum sent me out to play and told me to come back when the streetlights went on. We're losing that kind of sense of normality from that too. And as further generations feed into this, we just lose that story. They're starting to say that the algorithm is bringing kids up now as opposed to moulding them, which is quite sad. So each of these features impacts on the kids' mental health. So we know that for all of these reasons, the more time spent on a smartphone, the higher the rates of anxiety, depression, and associated mental health problems, loneliness, attention difficulties, impulse control, body dissatisfaction. And we know that there's also research that supports that there's reduced rates of these when restricted. There's evidence to even support that even a 2-week period sees an improvement in kids' mental health. So like 2 weeks of restriction, you can already see their mental health improving. And happiness spreads, but when it comes to smartphones, anxiety and depression seems to be contagious, and it feeds into that algorithm and feeds what they're seeing, and it can just make it worse and worse. So these are some graphs of some information that's about kids' mental health. So we can see that there has been, so if the graph goes back to 1981, but the introduction of smartphones was in 2010, so it's in that kind of grey area that you can see when they introduced and its popularity increased. And we know that there's been an increase in suicide rates across the UK between 15 and 19-year-olds. This one I think is particularly sad because it's ages 10 to 12, so it's self-harm episodes in UK teens, and there's been a 364% increase since 2010 for girls, and again since 2010, that was when smartphones were introduced. And that's reflected in what we see the practice. And this is another graph. It's again for self-harm episodes, but it's for a slightly older group of kids, 13 to 16. But again, it sees that increase, and that increase again since 2010, more so in girls. So yeah, that wasn't very cheery at all. But we know the young brain is vulnerable to technology associated with smartphone use, and we know that the younger they are, the more vulnerable they are, and we know that if they are using it more, there is an increased risk. And there's also evidence to suggest that the long-term mental health impact on kids is reduced if you delay smartphone introduction by a year. So by kind of stopping and thinking and reflecting on it and saying, right, well, maybe they're just too little just now, maybe we'll think about this again next year, can improve a kid's mental health long term. We know that the early introduction of smartphone use increases the risk of sleep problems, attention issues, depression, anxiety, negatively impacts brain function, brain development and social growth, and all of that has an impact on a kid's mental health. And I do think a massive part of it that's really sad is that opportunity cost, that they're disconnected from the real world and become obsessed with what's on that phone, when that phone and those app designers are not concerned about their growth and their development and becoming kind of a good human being and a human being that can grow and take on the real world. Yeah, children are now being brought up by the algorithm as opposed to being moulded by what they see, and no one is here to tell anybody what to do and or to pass comment or judgment on what anybody has done, but it's just to say there's this information isn't necessarily readily available. I shared this with all the partners at Largs, and I don't know if any of them had heard about any of this, because I just don't, the tech companies are not out there to promote this side of it. They're there to promote the perceived benefits and to increase sales. So nobody's really here fighting the corner, and as long as there's not government level intervention, it's then falling on parents, which is incredibly difficult to navigate that by yourself, or teachers or schools trying to navigate that themselves. And as GPs in the practice, we find it really difficult because there's not a huge amount that you can do, and by the time they've come to you, so much time has passed at home or with the school that I'm not saying it's too late, but there are things that you could have done earlier. So that's it. Also, this book is very good. So I don't know if anybody's read it, but if you were looking to find out more about it, and obviously none of those slides that I put on there have got the evidence base behind it, because there just wouldn't have been enough time or enough space on slides, but it's all in here. So if you want to explore one that's got really good analogies in it as well, which helps you to understand, then it's worthwhile giving this a read.
What book is that?
The Anxious Generation.
The Anxious Generation by Ruth and Hyde. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Good, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Next, we have Julie Stewart from the School of Education at the University of the West of Scotland. Thank you.
Hello everybody, nice to see you. So I'm going to talk about smartphone use from an educational perspective. I'll be thinking about what the impacts are of mobile phone usage in school. The overview really of what I'll be covering are these things that are on the screen at the minute, that there is, and we won't be surprised by this, a rising presence of smartphones in our learning spaces in schools and in university, which is where I work now in teacher education. There's really clear evidence on the cognitive, academic and social impacts of smartphone use, and I'll be taking you through some of that information tonight. I'll be stressing the importance of interpersonal interactions for well-being, that schools are social spaces, and what that social interaction in a school space looks like now is really quite different, and we're seeing a number of significant impacts on our young people. And I'll be covering some of the implications for our classrooms and school communities and why it is imperative that we get to grips with smartphone use and do something quite significant about it. I thought it might be quite interesting for you to hear teachers' perspective recorded in research, that teachers have quite a negative view of smartphone use because of the impacts they're seeing on their young people, whom they work really hard for every day, who they care about, who they look after, and they see that young people are experiencing social, psychological and learning effects, and they're absolutely palpable in the classroom. Even when phones are used for educational purposes, focus is reduced. And what a nice piece of work that UNESCO carried out told us was that even if it's a very minor distraction, if they look at their phone very briefly, it can take up to 20 minutes for our young people to get back on task and to refocus. Now, if our lessons, as they are in secondary, are only 50 minutes long, and their distraction is, 20 minutes or more, think of how the learning in every period is shrinking and shrinking. Students are distracted by non-educational apps. So even when we're trying to use particular technologies and platforms in the classroom to promote learning, there's too much distraction in those devices that takes minds away. And because there is, of course, this big educational tech, this ed tech agenda in schools, that schools partly have this important role to play in terms of promoting skills that young people need to thrive in a technology-driven society. Teachers feel pretty sceptical about some of these platforms and about needing mobile phones in schools because of the range of negative effects that they see. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information around how the brain works, how learning works, so that we can understand the impact of mobile phone and smartphones in particular. We all have working memories that are these finite, fragile stores, and learning is, the definition of learning is when we're able to move something from that short, temporal, finite store into our long-term memory. And working memory is this system where we keep things for a very short duration of time. And teachers need to understand, how do we look after the working memory, and how do we help our young people to move the things that we're trying to teach them from that fragile store into their long-term memory. And that defines what learning is, when it's been laid down in schema and they've memorized that. And there are important things for us to understand of things that impact upon our working memory. Our working memory, as I said, is this limited space. It's the number of things that we can be conscious of at any one time. So if we think about, for example, if we're going into the supermarket and we think, I need 6 things, how often would we come out thinking, oh, I've forgotten something? We do it all the time because our working memory, research tells us, has around 4 spaces, that's generally on average. Some people have a pretty good working memory and might have between 4 and 7, even up to 7 spaces in that working memory. I used to have a pretty good working memory. I used to be able to hold lots of different things in my mind. Now in my 40s, my working memory is a bit more challenged at the minute. And I find it hard to find the pen to write down all the things that I know I'll forget. But once had a good working memory, and so I did pretty well at school, because the stronger working memory that our young people have, the better the academic outcomes. So we know as teachers, as educators, we need to look after that working memory, know how it works, and know how things move from that fragile store into our long-term memory. But there are challenges because our working memory is vulnerable to overload. We see that in our own lives as adults and as young people every day, because there are things that are in our mind that then fall out of that temporary fragile store. So these things that I have on the screen here are the key challenges in the classroom, and this is what I talk to my student teachers about all the time, that there are particular things that we need to manage in the classroom so that learning happens. And actually, for learning to happen, it's pretty complex. And the thing that I want us to think about in particular is this middle box here, which is called extraneous load. And that's the load on our working memory that are factors imposed by the environment. So that might be somebody tapping their pen, tapping their fingers on the table. It might be young people's compulsion to reach into their pocket and touch their mobile phone. Even if the phone's face down in the desk, it causes this distraction. So what we found in schools, in education, is that smartphones, the existence of phones in schools, are putting such a pressure on the working memory, creating such a distraction, such an extraneous load, that focus and attention is really being compromised in the classroom. And I'm sure there are a few young people in the room right now. I wonder how many times a day teachers say, put phones away, don't touch your phone, and how many times that there is that sense of, you see somebody on a mobile phone. I go around it's normally 20-year-olds I teach now, and they're constantly on their mobile phone. They're a generation who's grown up through a digital age, and they are a really good measure of addiction in action, that these are young professionals who want to go out into education and they can't leave their phones alone. So what I want to stress is that smartphones are consuming the limited capacity that we have in our cognitive resources. So moving things from that short-term memory into our long-term memory, i.e. learning stuff, is becoming increasingly challenging in the classroom. We see that our Scottish scores, in terms of PISA results, for example, are falling off a cliff a little bit. We see that academic results in Scotland are not where they once were. Scotland used to be absolutely lauded for its education system, and we're not where we once were. And there are many reasons, but I can certainly say that we have fallen way behind countries who have gotten on top of the smartphone issue. There are higher cognitive costs, so it's harder for learning to happen for individuals who are more reliant on their devices. And what we're seeing is reduced focus, issues with memory, and difficulty with problem solving. So there are key implications for the classroom. We know that phones disrupt focus. I've explained this impact that mobile phones can have on memory by creating this distracting load and making it difficult for things to move to the long-term memory. The thing that I find most challenging and upsetting to see in our classrooms is the impact on social engagement. I was a teacher for nearly 20 years. I was head of English for 10 of those years. And for the majority, or a good portion of my career, I found I absolutely loved my job. Energies were these buzzing, industrious, happy places. And I genuinely, experienced a huge amount of joy in the English classroom. Now, when I go into classrooms, and I'm in classrooms all over the country very regularly, there's a much more subdued atmosphere. There's a deterioration of energy, of motivation. There's weakened attention spans. And so classrooms feel really different to the way that they once did. And that's not to say that that's every period, every class, every primary or secondary classroom, every day of the week. But it's certainly becoming more normal that that's what classrooms look like. Teachers navigate reduced eye contact and interaction with students. My students are currently out in schools at the minute, and we just had a meeting this week, and I was asking them what are the key issues, what are you needing support with, and it was divided fairly well down the middle. Some students said, I just can't get any young people to speak at all. Classrooms have become quieter. And in other schools, other contexts, behaviour has become more disruptive, and they were asking for tips to get on top of that, and I'll talk to you a little bit about why that is in a moment. The culture has shifted towards this fragmented attention, and so we're having to reduce or chunk learning down into very small parts to manage the really reduced attention spans that our young people are showing. So we really need intentional structures to support collaboration and connection in the classroom. So this next slide highlights some of the things I've just been saying about what the classroom environment looks like and feels like. It looks and feels like a place with reduced energy and participation. And I think we could be quite confident to suggest that that's as a result of a few things like low mood, the lack of sleep that some of our young people are experiencing. There's definitely heightened anxiety and reduced confidence, that feeling of self-efficacy, that young people feel confident that they can do the tasks. And that's related to this idea of our executive function that we've mentioned, our ability to manage things in our daily lives. We've probably heard quite a lot of people talking about, oh, young people aren't resilient anymore. And we need to get to the bottom of what do we mean by that? Young people are brilliant. I love working with young people. And they're great people to interact with on a daily basis, but we need to support them because there are many things that are happening in their lives that mean that they feel less happy, they feel less confident. They aren't quite resilient enough always to see difficult tasks through. And research absolutely tells us that that's the impact that excessive smartphone use has on our executive function, our ability to cope and manage daily challenges and to achieve particular goals and outcomes. The increase in dysregulation in the classroom has been really stark. So that means that our young people, there's a reduced ability to control their behaviour. There's an inability to manage their emotional state. And there's a real connection between dysregulation and impulsivity, as we heard from our previous speaker. And that's when we hear reports about behaviour in schools in Scotland. There's increased violence. There was a programme on Channel 4 which was fairly bleak and depressing about how Scotland is, in Scottish schools, there's poorer behaviour than in any other part of the UK. And we need to think about what research is telling us around the impulsive behaviours that are directly linked with excessive screen time. And of course, our young people have reduced attention spans, as I've mentioned. So all of these things that I've been talking to you about stress really, really strongly the importance of balanced digital habits. It's really complex in schools when there is this agenda and curriculum which asks us to look at supporting our young people for jobs that haven't been invented yet, for technologies that haven't been invented yet, for the rise of AI, that so many jobs will involve artificial intelligence. And that's one role that a school needs to execute. And in the other way, schools are this microcosm of society where we see things that are happening in the world are really raw and real in our classrooms. and we are recognising really strongly the negative impact of mobile phone and excessive screen time. And so that balancing act between having to look at technology and introduce it as platforms in our classrooms, but also manage this really significantly impactful social issue means there's such a tension in terms of what happens in schools. And that's why it's really important that the Scottish Government get behind the issue and make it an absolute system-wide ban of smartphones in schools. We know that they're so embedded within the social interactions that our young people have in their friendships and so on, but other countries are moving forward with brick phones and reintroducing those as means of contact and communication, and that seems to be a very, very positive step. We know that face-to-face interactions are essential for learning, they're essential for happiness, and they're essential for our development. And it was interesting, as part of my Masters in Education I did, and I'm carrying this forward into a doctorate at the minute, looking at interpersonal relationships and communication, how we need to have human connection and eye contact and be able to read visual cues for our own happiness. And our young people find it very difficult, or many young people find it very difficult to sustain eye contact and to communicate verbally and non-verbally. And often when I walk around schools at break and at lunchtime, I see young people sitting with their friends on phones. And that's not all the time. And the young people in here will know that, of course, you do talk to your friends, and of course you do, you know, you have fun, you have a laugh. That it's not, you know, absolute doom and gloom, but this use of smartphones in schools is absolutely pervasive, and it is having an impact on young people's ability to interact in that interpersonal way. Smartphones reduce social presence and relational depth. And so teachers are finding it more difficult at times to build relationships with young people in classes, and that effort is becoming greater because of the impact of phones. Students, research tells us, report weaker peer connections with increased device use. When we know that strong interpersonal relationships, we've known this for a very long time, that constructivist approaches, that social interaction is key to learning, then we need our schools to be social spaces. And to be social spaces, we need to remove that extraneous load, that distraction of the smartphone. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I think this definitely worries me. As an English teacher, I was always interested in which words are added to the dictionary on a yearly basis. And what do they tell us about society? So I went away and I had a wee look at words that were added to the dictionary when I was in school in the 80s and 90s. I found lots of interesting things. So when I was a teenager, when I was about 14, 15, girl power was added. So that was the kind of era of the Spice Girls. So, you know, positive reflection of society. There were also really concerning things, and it's every generation, every era of teenagers, there's something that the older generation worry about and think it's, you know, this is it. This is the, you know, kind of doomsdaying. But so heroin chic was also added in the 90s, that kind of really rise of Kate Moss, a really skinny supermodel. So there were lots of negative things, but these words that are added describe something that's happening in society. And the words that have been added this year are doom scrolling and brain rot. And I don't think there's anything positive we can take about what these words reflect societally. And the one that I think I'm most worried about is parasocial. That was Cambridge Dictionary's word of the year. I don't know if you've come across it, if you've read any newspaper articles about this word parasocial. There's a really interesting video by a professor in psychology at the University of Cambridge talking about this word parasocial. And it's this word that is about a relationship or a connection with one person, between themselves and maybe a famous person they don't know, an influencer, or an AI bot.
Just wrap up in 2 minutes.
Of course, absolutely. And it's this one-sided relationship, and I think it's something that we need to think very carefully about in terms of what parasocial reflects in terms of our young people, that they're creating more of a connection online with AI bots or with influencers rather than real life, authentic relationships. And so UNESCO tells us that we need to have a human-centred vision in education. And we see other countries have worked really hard and reversed their EdTech approaches, like Sweden, for example, to return to more traditional methods because they saw their results, the academic results of their young people falling, and they pride themselves on academic achievement. And Australia has done similar things. So what I wanted to stress in terms of education this evening was that smartphones influence cognition, our memory, and they have a significant impact on learning environments. Research consistently tells us that there are really strong and negative cognitive costs, and that interpersonal relationships remain vital for development and well-being. And unfortunately, smartphones and their presence in our schools are getting in the way of these things happening. Thanks very much for your time.
Right hand button.
Got you. Okay, my name's Katy Miller. I am here to talk about this issue from a parental perspective. I will find this very difficult. I am absolutely usually the kind of person that would say, leave everybody to it. Make your own choices that are right for you and your family. No need for everybody else to be worried about what we're doing or for us to try and talk about that to other people. But I think in this instance, as the health and education professionals who are here have said, we're not getting a clear steer as parents from government, again, also local government. I appreciate we've now got government, health and education professionals here talking to us about this, but this isn't something that we as parents are getting a really clear steer on. And I think in every other issue, we get that clear steer, we can take our own choices, and we don't really need to be discussing that with others or trying to influence people or in any way. So I am going to, as I said, talk a little bit about how we as parents have dealt with this. But actually just wanted to first pick up on something that Julie was saying there towards the end of her piece. I'm a parent, but I'm also a digital marketing director at an agency in Glasgow. So I work with social media algorithms, social media advertising, AI optimization every day. I also recruit graduates into digital careers, and I have in 15 years not come across a graduate who doesn't have the technical skills that we need. They do not need more technical skills in schools. Scrolling, clicking, moving things around, these are not things that anybody is struggling with, but we are increasingly seeing problems with first-class degrees, 2-1s coming out, and they cannot look me in the eye in an interview. They struggle with critical thinking, they struggle with problem solving, and actually when it comes to the proper technical skills that matter around data analysis and these kind of things, we are definitely seeing a decline in that. And obviously that's, you know, reflecting what we're seeing in education. So I just want to touch on that. Obviously, if anybody's got any questions related to that when we come to the kind of panel piece, I'll be happy to have a bit of a chat about that as well. But yeah, I'm here to try and give a little bit of a view of what it feels like to be a parent in this day and age. It's a really difficult topic for us all to try and navigate. I have 3 children. They're aged 8, 10 and 12, and they're all here in Largs. So as I said, generally speaking, you know, these are our choices and our reasons for what we're doing. Our house is full of screens. We get loads of them from work. As soon as a laptop isn't fast enough for one of our developers, it becomes available, okay? So I'm certainly not saying that we don't have screens or we're cracking down on them or we're in any way, you know, a screen-free household. However, I think we are, relative to most people, pretty tight on how we use those screens within our household. So we have filters, we have timers, and we have parental passcodes on our router, on our individual devices, and on the browsers. We are able to control the individual times and filters on any device that's in our house. So I can continue working on my laptop while my husband controls the Wi-Fi to the TV in the living room. And these things are available. It's called the Cllr app. Happy again to talk about the things that we're using to try and minimize the impact of excessive screen time in our household. As I said, each device and app that we have in our house, we do try to assess on their own merits. And again, we are absolutely not saying we are getting this right to any stretch of the imagination, but we are really trying and assess for each device or each app within any device, what does it add and what might it take away from our family life and from our children's happiness. As things stand, as I said, we don't have any, our children don't have any access to social messaging. So I know there's kind of a overarching social media. I think people generally accept, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok are social media. Social messaging, including Snapchat and maybe WhatsApp, are things that people perhaps don't think there's as much of an issue with. We are really not keen on those in our house either, and I'll have a little bit of a chat about why. Again, I think just generally kind of giving you a sense of where we're coming from with this, we find basic mobile phones are doing the job for us at the moment. Our 10-year-old and our 12-year-old are obviously wanting a little bit more independence. They're out and about with their friends, they're at the skate park, they're at the swimming pool, they're doing these things under their own steam. And the basic mobile phones that they have are providing that link that we want, and that we hear most parents saying that's the reason they need a phone. They need a phone because they're going to walk to school. They need a phone because they're going to be out and about with their friends. And if they need help, or I need to contact them to let them know about a change of plans, etc., I need them to have that phone. But we are finding that the basic mobile phone, they can call us, we can call them, they can text. It's doing the job that we need it to do without adding lots of risks that we don't want to navigate just yet. Again, I'm not going to go into loads of detail on the stats around online grooming, eating disorders, levels of suicide, mental health crisis, misogyny, which is something that probably hasn't come up much yet, or the risk of serious sexual abuse via grooming on a mobile phone, because I'm here really to talk about this from a parental perspective. We've also got other speakers who know much more about these things than I do. However, it's easy to think we see these things in the media, but are they really happening here in Largs? Are they really affecting our kids? Or is this something that's just a bit more unusual? It's probably not happening here. It's probably all right. All of these issues are things that we personally came across, despite our children not having smartphones, during the ages of 7 to 10 here in Largs. And I guess one of the ones that really kind of set the alarms for me and started me looking into this in a bit more detail was a conversation between a group of 9 and 10-year-old boys who knew I was listening, and talking about a foot pic that one of the girls in their year in P6 had sent to one of the boys in P6. And the boys themselves were saying, "What's a foot pic?" And the explanation coming from the boy who had received this on his phone was that one of the girls in his year had taken a picture of her foot, sent it via Snapchat to another 9 or 10-year-old boy because he's into feet. Okay, so this is obviously worries on so many different levels. 9 and 10-year-olds thinking, from a girl's perspective, objectifying yourself and sharing those images. Obviously, that was originally sent on Snapchat. It was screenshotted and sent on. So the boy who had received it was not the boy it was originally sent to. But also, where is that coming from? That isn't coming from any 9 or 10-year-old boy, unless there are, adults in these Snapchat groups that they're in these WhatsApp groups that they're in, planting these ideas. Is that where that comes from? There was so many elements of that I just thought, I'm really very uncomfortable with that idea. And I'd say that's partly what led me to start looking into this a little bit more as our kids were getting towards that kind of top end of secondary or primary school. And you're thinking, this is inevitable, isn't it? You know, you've got to get them one as they go into secondary school. You've got to let them have access to these things. But the number of said different issues that we came across just in that couple of years, where we were starting to think, well, you know, obviously when he goes to secondary school, we'll let him have one. It really did cause pause for thought, and again, a lot more research and connecting with some more people who knew more about this than I do. Like I say, the issues, you know, children getting really upset about receiving chain death threats, messages on WhatsApp, it saying, you know, if you don't send this on, you will die at 3 a.m. These kind of things. These are not things that 9-year-olds can rationalize and understand. And I think this is one of the big things as well for me, the experience that children have on these platforms, even if they are platforms that we ourselves use. And again, most of us probably aren't actively using Snapchat in the same way the kids might be, but a lot of us probably are using WhatsApp. However, we're interacting with other adults who would not forward those kind of things. They would immediately delete them. So those things are not rife in our groups as adults, but they very much are with young kids. And again, you know, even just recently, so many of my 12-year-old's friends have seen the graphic and live shooting of Charlie Kirk. And that's just something that once you've seen it, you can't unsee. And they didn't necessarily want to see it, but these things are happening where people are being added to groups, something shocking is being sent around as part of a classroom group even, just so that you can watch the reaction of everybody who sees it. And so these are the sorts of experiences that we, maybe as parents, just don't expect, because we use these platforms differently and the people that we interact with on these platforms use them differently. And moving on from that, obviously as part of my job, I work with the algorithms in social media advertising and looking at how we can target the individuals that my clients would like to put their products in front of and to get that interaction. Now, again, that's with adults, but those algorithms are hugely powerful. They're persuasive, they're massively underregulated, and essentially the way that the apps are designed and the way that the content is pushed out there is all about selling kids' attention. The more time that our children spend on these apps, the more advertising revenue is made for these companies. So I don't trust the algorithms. My numbers have gone a bit squiffy here. I also don't trust the strangers that my children could come across on the internet or via these social media apps. And essentially, if your child has access to the internet, it means that the internet has access to your child. And that, again, is where I doubt we're doing this perfectly, but we are trying really hard with filters, with obviously parental oversight when the children are using these things. And ultimately, the problem, as I said, that I see with smartphones is that it is so difficult to do that. And it is very, very difficult to know if your child is interacting with strangers on these devices. But actually, ultimately, the main thing that I don't trust at the moment, and the reason our children do not have access to social messaging or to social media, is because I don't trust our own kids and their friends. And that's not because they're bad kids, it's because they're 8, 10, and 12. As we heard from Steph and from Julie, they have immature executive function and impulse control. So they aren't capable of resisting the urge to click on that video, even though it looked like somebody might get shot. They are not capable of resisting the urge to then forward that on in the way that we as adults would do, that would protect us and protect our friends from seeing those same things. They're also not capable at those young ages of identifying undue influence by the algorithms or by strangers. So it's much more difficult and much more likely that they will be duped by somebody pretending to be 12 than we might be. Not saying that we'd be infallible to that, but obviously with their children minds, and that Steph went into quite a bit of detail on, the kids just aren't capable of differentiating in what they're seeing. The algorithms really are quite scary these days. I had an instance recently, again, just to give you a sense of the level of tracking that is occurring. I had my Facebook app running on my phone. WhatsApp is encrypted end to end, but because my Facebook app was running, I received a one-to-one WhatsApp message from a friend saying, "Can you recommend an acupuncturist, because I remember you using one a while back?" And I messaged back to say, I'm really sorry. The lady I used wasn't local, she was up in Glasgow, but actually she's not working anywhere anyway. I did not use the lady's name, and that was the extent of the conversation. I then went on to Facebook later, and she was the first person being recommended to me as a connection. She is saved in my phone with her name, which matches her Facebook profile, brackets acupuncturist, but that is the extent of it. So, I mean, it would be a pretty big coincidence if that is not an instance of my WhatsApp being tracked by the Facebook app that was also running on my phone. This is the stuff that I work in the industry. I am an adult. I can see through that, but that's the level of reinforcement that is happening. So again, if you think about something a lot more worrying than an acupuncturist recommendation, if somebody's been having a chat with their friend via WhatsApp to say, I'm really feeling down, I think I look dead fat in that dress you lent me, whatever it is, those things can then be ultimately reinforced by the content that's being pushed at them on social media. And that's terrifying. You know, it could even be a message with you. Did you try on the dress that your auntie lent you? You know, well, I did, but I think it's too tight for me. You know, this is the sort of stuff that is then feeding into the stuff that will be fed via these algorithms into their feeds. They did, yeah. That's it. Get rid of her. No more slides for her. So yeah, I just wanted again to say a little bit about our experience of delaying. And when I say we're delaying, actually none of our kids are yet at the legal age, that legal minimum age for any of these social media platforms. They're all still under 13. So to that extent, we are not delaying as things stand. However, we are definitely, versus our children's peers, delaying their access to smartphones and to social media. And it is, you know, it's a really hard thing to start discussing. As I said, I do a lot of public speaking, yet I'm quite nervous standing up here because it feels judgy. It also feels odd to feel that we are being unusually risk averse on this matter, because there's a few people out here who know me and know that we are not tending to be on the more risk averse end of life in general, you know. But on this, we definitely are more risk averse than most people that we come across. As I said, it's difficult to make those different choices than your friends are making or other parents are making without it coming across that you are judging their choices. And obviously we were also worried that our kids could miss out. You know, if everybody's organising things on WhatsApp and our son is not on there, is he going to start being left out of things? But so far, as I said, we are actually feeling quite empowered by the decisions that we've been taking. We definitely won't be getting it 100% right, but we actually don't have any major regrets so far at the approach that we've been taking. And I also know that that is quite different to a lot of other people who have a 12-year-old. So hence why I thought it is, you know, it's worth standing up here and trying to share a little bit about our thinking around these things. In terms of the kids, as Sam said, it would have been really great if we could have had Rory along here tonight. He is my 12-year-old and he's doing a test set for his swim club. But all of the children, and again, you know, my girls are only 8 and 10, but quite a few of their friends do already have phones. All of the kids are happy, they're sociable, they're active, they sleep well, they read for pleasure, they play, they create. They do also watch quite a bit of telly. My son has a Switch. Again, it's got, you know, controls on it in terms of timing and so on, but they're definitely not screen deprived, as it were. Very content with basic phones. My 10-year-old actually doesn't have one yet, but she's about to get one, because she is out and about more often, and my 8-year-old definitely doesn't have one, but will at the same point when she's starting to go out a bit more, we'll have a basic mobile phone. And actually all of them are totally on board with our controls and the criteria for changing those controls. So it's a really open conversation. At some point, we probably will let them have WhatsApp, because it's probably the least of the evils as far as I see these platforms. But that'll be when we really start to think he's more capable of controlling what he might be sent, and his interactions in those groups, as to how he would be able to interact with that. And we believe that he will be getting more value from that in a positive fashion than he would be getting stress in terms of what he's being sent or the interactions that are occurring in those groups. And his view, as I said, he's perfectly happy with his basic phone. He likes being able to text message and to call. He does think WhatsApp might be useful at some point, but he's also really quite glad that he hasn't had the stress of some of the things that have been shared, particularly during the kind of later primary school years, and the level of fallout that he's seen among some of his peers in school around the things that have been shared. And he's really not interested in being sucked into Snapchat or TikTok brain rot, which demonstrates he's right on there in terms of his terminology. I thought I'd just stick this one in here. It sums up how I do feel. I think we have overprotected our children in the real world, and I think we are collectively underprotecting them online. I then thought I'd go a little bit kind of off-piste and try and start to have a little bit that, take a step back from this. We're living today, we're having to make the decisions today around what access do we give our children and when. But let's, kind of look back at this as, what might the history books say about this period? I keep moving there. What might the history books say about this period in society? Or there won't be any history books, but the AI overviews or whatever they become. So at the moment we have a real culture that, it's just life. A lot of people are saying they'll be exposed at some stage anyway. If you withhold smartphones or social media, they'll sneak the access, they'll see it via their friends' devices. And as a result, and this includes, educational professionals, it's inevitable. Therefore, we just focus on educating them about how to keep themselves safe online. However, that's not the approach that we take with lots of other things that we know are risky to health and require adult level decision making to do in a slightly safer way. So we don't provide our 9-year-olds or even our 15-year-olds with unlimited access to cigarettes, alcohol, or porn as part of educating them on how to consume those safely. And yet our cultural norm around smartphones and social media is that we provide access whilst trying to, educate the kids about how to use these things safely. And I do think that it probably is largely to do with tech company lobbying power and ad budgets in terms of the reasons around that. Again, this one, I stuck this in here as a bit of a talking point. This is the one issue that I feel there's so much variety at the moment in society. So there's lots of stuff that we as a society have voted on laws for and agreed upon that there should be a minimum age for these things. So children travel in a high back booster seat until they are somewhere between the age of 6 and 8 years old, depending on their height and their weight. And that's a pretty much universal thing that parents agree on, that society's agreed on. It's very unusual that you find people who don't use a car seat for their 3-year-old. Obviously, as you get closer to that age limit, as you get up towards maybe 85% of the way up to that age limit, you do get a little bit more variation between families making their own decisions around those kind of levels of risk and what they will accept. So as I said, whether it's a car booster seat, whether it is drinking alcohol, smoking, or porn, we have legal minimum age limits, and generally we as a society will tend to stick to those until at least I think around 85% of that limit is reached, at which point parents might start to say, yeah, I'm happy for them to have a glass of wine or a couple of beers with their friends, as long as they're at home or in somebody else's house where the environment's controlled and they won't be coming across strangers and this kind of thing. And yet social media is the thing that really sticks out. The minimum age is actually 13, which I think probably quite a few people feel is far too young. And yet it's still absolutely the norm for children who are not even 85% of that to have social media access. So 91% of 11-year-olds, which is the 85% threshold as you head towards 13, have smartphones with social media on them. Professionals accept that that's normal, and parents who don't provide that are considered unusually risk averse. Whereas if you look at any of these other things, people starting to provide unlimited access to alcohol at age 15 would probably be seen as, and in any environment, take it out with you, go and, take it wherever you want, would be probably seen as really quite far out there on the other side of things and being a bit too lax. So I just kind of wanted to put that up there. Also wanted to have a bit of a look at, again, the history and the fact that cultural norms do change. It was genuinely normal and accepted that smoking helped you to manage stress and to stay slim and was a good thing to do, okay? And it seems totally alien to us now, but it absolutely was the case that you could advertise cigarettes for the young of America, you could have physicians backing that, and that, you know, that was allowed. So smoking was just a part of growing up. Parents brought their kids their first cigarettes. Buses, restaurants and playgrounds were full of people smoking. Research showed it wasn't healthy, but it was the norm. Tobacco companies had huge political influence and huge advertising budgets. It was many years before the negative health impacts became widely accepted and effective legislation was brought in. It was a difficult transition because people were addicted, but far fewer people do now smoke. And yet we are still paying a high price for that in the society of today in terms of that, you know, widespread addiction to smoking that we had for many years. And I have only changed a couple of words in this. But essentially you change the word smoking and cigarettes to social media and smartphones. And I really do think this is how history will look back on the period that we are in right now. And I find this useful when I start to wonder, am I doing the right thing? Which is why I thought I would share it. And as I said, obviously hindsight is always 2020. But I think as parents, as educators, as health professionals, we all just want to be able to say that we did the best we could with the information that we had and in the environment that we were in at the time. And I hope maybe me standing up here and doing this is helping a little bit for other people to feel proud of their decisions in hindsight. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you take this one away? Sorry.
Right hand side up.
Okay, cool. That's great. Hello, everybody. It's really great to see you. Thank you so much for coming here and taking the time to think about this with us tonight. I really appreciate it. My name's Ruth Mellor. I'm here and I have some caveats before I begin. So firstly, I do happen to work in the NHS, but I'm here as a private individual, not on behalf of my employer. I also have second caveat. I'm here as a school coordinator. I lead the Smartphone Free Childhood campaign at my kids' primary school, St John the Baptist Primary School. But I don't officially represent the whole of the national organisation. So that's my two caveats out the way. My Smartphone Free Childhood group is a subgroup of our parent council, and that's how I've come in. What I'm going to talk to you today about is why did I want to do something about this, which will reflect, we have some similar reflections, what we've done locally for our school, how that's been helpful, and then because I know there's some education colleagues here, I have a wonderful colleague, Miss Parker, who's in our senior management team, and she's the person who's been assigned to our working group, and so I've got some of her reflections as well for you guys. So these are Sam's slides, so you can ignore the slides. I have just got my notes here on paper. Why did I decide I needed to do something? Well, there were two reasons. You might be able to resonate with these. Firstly, I realised I don't really like the way I was using my phone. It wasn't terrible or anything, but you know, I'd have my phone in my pocket all the time. I'd have it on the table, it'd be in my bag, it would be with me all the time. And I've got wee kids, and you know, it'd buzz, it'd message. I'd turned off, I'd muted as many things as I could, but nonetheless, you know, there was these distractions coming in, and my kids would be like, "Oh, do you need to deal with that, mummy?" And I'd be playing with them, or I'd be having a meal, and I'd be like, "No, I don't need to deal with that," but we're all distracted by this scenario. So if I didn't like the way I was dealing with my phone, then what could I expect of them and to mirror my behaviour going forward? So we actually now have a little phone box in our house, whereas the charging station. So I've kind of feel like the phone's got less control over me than I have over it, which is quite nice. So there was firstly that realisation that I didn't really like my relationship with the phone. The second thing was I was at somewhere you might have all been. I was at a soft play birthday party. And that was, as ever, I was wishing that I was eating the chips that the children were eating and hoping for no head injuries. But I was having this chat with another parent, and they were talking about how an older child was probably going to get a phone for Christmas because, you know, everyone in that primary class was going to get a phone for Christmas. And they didn't really want to get a phone for Christmas for that child, but they felt they didn't want that child to miss out, that sort of difficult dilemma of missing out versus keeping them away from the things you want to keep them away from. But there was also this sort of apathy that they had no choice in that scenario, even though it was their child and their decision, that there wasn't really a choice. And it was actually at quite a young age they were talking about. And I'd assumed that I wouldn't have to think about this for years. But I was like, right, well, actually, clearly this decision is coming down the line sooner than I thought. So, but all of us here, I suspect, are time poor, juggling people. And I was like, well, I know I need to do something about this. I would like to do something about this, but I only have a limited amount of time. What can I do? And then I happened to see this news article around the Smartphone Free Childhood campaign. And I Googled them, as you do whenever you want to know something. And lo and behold, they'd already created a whole like pack of this is exactly what you need to do in your school, and here's template letters, and here's a questionnaire, and here's all that stuff. And I was like, right, fine, that's great. Someone's already done the hard work for me. So I took the pack and I brought it to, I was already a member of our parent council. I brought it to the parent council and I was like, look, is this something that we could work on? And they were like, yes, like go ahead, set up a subgroup, no problem. And so I found a couple of other people who were happy to do this with me. We had lots of chats with lots of parents, and that's how we progressed. So first thing we did was we went into our pack of already made stuff and just edited their questionnaire, because we were like, well, actually, what do parents and carers think? Is it just me and the people I've happened to chat to who've got similar views, or is this a more widespread perspective? And we, our school has got around 330 something kids, and we did this. So this started in the beginning of the academic year 2024-25. So I've been toying with this stuff for almost 2 years now. And we got 122 responses from parents or carers of young people. And the two big things that came out from that was, one, they really wanted more information, like you're getting here today, around how to do things more safely on the internet and all that kind of jazz. But they also, one of the things that Smartphone Free Childhood is really promotes is the idea of a parent pact, to give parents back a choice, so that you can choose not to have a phone for your child at a time when you don't want it. That you're dealing with this social pressure, because the social pressure is removed when people say, actually, I'm not going to give my child a phone. And if you can get several people in your class being like, actually, we're all not going to give our child a phone, then suddenly little Jimmy being like, Mom, I want a phone. Everyone's got a phone. You can be like, well, I think you'll find there's this person, 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 this person are already saying they're not giving their child a phone. And it just takes that pressure away. So it's giving parents back the choice to choose. So there was lots of, we overwhelmingly heard people are really happy about the idea of a pact and being able to get that choice back. But we also wanted to know what our young people in the school thought. So we did a questionnaire through the school of primary 5s to 7s and their experiences of smartphones. So this was last academic year, and we got 89% of the P5, 6s and 7s to completed this survey. And of our P5s, 45% of them reported owning a fully functioning smartphone. Of our P6s, we had 2/3, 66% of them already had a fully functioning smartphone. And of our P7s, 84% of them already had a fully functioning smartphone. And that was in the October. So it was just at the beginning of the academic year. So they hadn't had all the Christmas present tranche of smartphones in play yet. But I was particularly interested to know, well, what were their experiences? So we asked them about the kinds of things that you might do with a smartphone. So we asked them, so some good ones. So they are a friend, they could answer as they are a friend. They are a friend, 52% of them had used their smartphone to help them with their homework. Excellent, so that was good. Furthermore, 65% of them responded that they or a friend had seen a video that inspired them. And again, hooray for that element of the smartphone. Unfortunately, 25% of them reported that they or a friend had received a mean message. And 22% of them reported that they or a friend had had a photo or a video of them taken without their permission. 33%, a third, this will not surprise you, reported that they or a friend had used their phone in the middle of the night. So we know that's the things that you've been raising. And the one that worried me most, though, was that 28%, so just over a quarter of them, reported that they or a friend had been contacted by someone they didn't know on their smartphone. So this is their self-reporting. So that was something that we did. Then we, in line with the parents' request, we had an Internet Safety Day session, panel session, and that's how I know Sam. That's how we got to meet each other, because he came and did a stall. And we also provided a tips and tricks sheet for people to look at links on how to more safely use the internet. That was another thing we did. But our main emphasis has, as a group, has been having a presence within the school as a stall, like an information stall, and an opportunity to sign the pact at, we've been to curriculum night, been to parents' evenings. I had a really fun time at the primary 1 induction session. Then when we had the summer fete, we did a couple of fun bits for our stall as well. It wasn't just information and pact signing. So yes, and then we have got a Padlet where all our bits and pieces are put together, and that's will at some point get linked to the school website. We're having trouble with that linking, but thank goodness for Miss Parker, who enabled the Padlet to be created in the first place. So those are the things we've done. So how has this been helpful? Well, I feel that doing this has resulted in good discussions, a good platform for discussion. People are able to talk about this. It's raising awareness. And also we recognise that we're all trying to do our best as parents. Like we're all making the choices that we can, the best way that we can. And we are living in an environment that is very different to the one that we grew up in. I thought your comment around the generational effect of kids who are coming with who are new parents of kids who have always had smartphones will be really interesting to see, because I'm still hearing these echoes around of, well, actually it's quite different to when I grew up, and not the understanding of how different it is. So that was good. In terms of our parents, pupils who already had phones, we were able to highlight all these different resources that they could access to think about how to make things safer, and practical tips around that. And also on our Padlet, we had the link to our feeder secondary school and their digital policy. So then it's easy for parents to see what the expectations are around that. And I can't remember, the reason that I was slightly late because I can't remember whether I said I'm in Lanarkshire, so that's key. So I'm not a Largs lady, I'm afraid, but I'm actually still Lanarkshire. And yeah, and then for our parents who are thinking about the next step, and like for example the transition to secondary school, we have highlighted to them the Smartphone Free Childhood website, and that's got loads of great suggestions of alternative phones, so you don't have to go from nothing to a smartphone. There's actually loads of great options in between, so that gives them that information. But the most thing I'm proud of is that we have 143 or 43% of our children signed up to our local parent pact. So our pact is acting in the best interests of my child and their community. I pledge to wait to give a smartphone to my child at least until they have left St John the Baptist Primary School for secondary school. Now, this is not the same as the National Pact, which we also promote and are trying to get people to take up. But 2 years ago when we started, this is what we felt, especially because the ages that we knew that kids were getting their smartphones, was something that was achievable and we could really support within the school. So that's where we're at. And I'm really proud that we've given that choice. So I'm conscious of time, but I will quickly tell you what Miss Parker told me. So Miss Parker is our wonderful teacher liaison. So speaking to the teachers there, she mentioned that, you'll not be surprised, senior management team note that a lot of time is spent on dealing with the issues that arise from phones in the classroom setting. So kids are having to come out of class to deal with these resolutions. There's kids that are not attending school as a result of situations that have happened through the phone stuff. There's damage to their relationships. Miss Parker noted that in the past, you have a bad time with your friend on Monday, but then you can go home, and then on Tuesday you can be friends again. But if you're never disconnected and there's this constant wiring, then that's difficult. So it's impacting your relationships. Children, this will not surprise you, particularly those in the audience. Children are really clever. This is not a surprise. They're very skilled. So we've got kids who are manipulating images but not recognizing that once they put them out there, that's they're out there. And so the implications of that. And then something that was a recent discovery. So we discovered there was a discovery that the primary 6-7 WhatsApp group had over 250 members, but we have less than 100 primary 6s and 7s. So that was then, when that was discovered, that was able to be highlighted to parents because they might want to be thinking about who's all in that WhatsApp group? Are there people that their children aren't friends with that are there? So they've also changed the school policy slightly, which is great. They already had a good position, which was that if you rocked up in class with a phone, then it would go in a box and that would go to the office. But now, because they've recognised that in the 15 minutes before the start of school even, they were having problems in the playground, Miss Parker or whoever it is at the front gate of the senior school, and the boxes in the trolley are there, and the kids have to drop their phones in before they even get onto the premises. And she says that's really helped with those issues before school, and it has reduced the number of kids bringing the phones into school. When I asked her view on technology, she said it's all about balance. We've got enough Chromebooks in our school that the kids don't need phones, and they're used for learning skills such as math and literacy with progression when the kids are ready for them. In terms of how she felt about having me and my cohort of Smartphone Free Childhood people within the school, she said she was really pleased, which was good, because obviously I could just be making this up, but she did say she was pleased. She said she was pleased because the parents were doing all the work. And she said that she spends a bit of time liaising with us, but that's part of her job, and it's work that she's trying to do to make the school a better place. And it's something that parents are asking for and struggling with. She's had no complaints about the work, rather that it's opened up parents' eyes. And before, parents were stuck and they didn't know what to do, and now it's giving them an option. And so you've heard why I'm involved, you've heard how we've made that happen, and that the school is glad of the work that we're doing. So this is, so as of the 30th of October, there were 62 Smartphone Free Childhood School organisers covering 57 schools in Scotland, 4 of which are based in Ayrshire. And so if you're coming from a school, you may want to liaise with one of them. Otherwise, Smartphone Free Childhood also have a teacher's resource page that you can access. And if anyone in the audience is feeling motivated to think they might want to become a school organiser, and you can definitely do less work than I've done, then come and speak to me. I've got the link for signing up. And I have found it very rewarding. I was daunted. It was a bit scary, but I'm really glad I've done it. I feel like I'm making a difference, and I'm not just for my kids, but I'm hoping that we're able to make a difference for their peers too. So I would definitely encourage you to consider it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That was
Perfect. Thank you, Todd. Todd's got to go and get the ferry.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the billboard.
Thanks very much for coming.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Brilliant. So I'm Sam Rice. I'll try and keep this quick because I'm aware we're a little bit over time. So I wanted to start with this because this caught my eye the other day. It's sitting in our kitchen. It's a thing my son made. It just says, "I love my dad." And it just reminded me that the reason I'm putting myself through all this stress and trouble is because my kids love me and I love them and I owe it to them. And I'll tell you my story of how I came to this. I'll just skip straight onto that. I worried a little bit about how I was going to raise my kids in a world with Alexa and smartphones everywhere ever since our oldest was a baby. But it was 3 years ago when he was 8 in primary school, and he asked for a smartphone and said all of his friends had one. And I was a bit taken aback. And the thing that really struck me was that I suddenly found myself in this crazy dilemma, which Ruth has already mentioned. Like, I just couldn't believe it. I didn't want him to be left out, the only kid without a smartphone. That really bothered me, that thought. But at the same time, I knew I didn't want him to have one. I just knew he wasn't ready. I was worried it'd be addictive and all the other stuff that we've touched on. So there just seemed like no sensible choice here. And so what did I do? I looked online to try and find, there must be other parents facing this crazy dilemma, this trap. But I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find any evidence of any other parents in 2022 facing this terrible decision. So I not in the UK anyway, no, I better say. I found information about internet safety, about regulation, but nothing about how do you not give your kid a smartphone when all the other parents are doing it. So I reached out to the other kids in my oldest son's class and asked if any of them were concerned, if they'd already given their kids a phone. A few of them responded, and I asked if we wanted to together just wait and not give our kids phones until they're a bit older. So a few of us, it's only a very small class, there was like 10 or 15 in the class, and just a handful of us formed a separate little chat group to try and support each other with that. But I was aware that this must be affecting parents throughout Largs, throughout Scotland, throughout the UK, and I couldn't find any information online. So I built a website called Kids for Now, with the idea of just connecting parents who sign up on the website. And then I would, if they were in the same school and in the same area, using geography, I would connect them with each other, send them an email together, put them in touch. And through that was creating these little pacts of parents all across the country. And slowly over the next couple of years, hundreds of parents across the country signed up. But I really knew this thing needed to take off and really go big. I mean, it really seemed to me like a big issue. And I was trying my best, but I realized soon that I couldn't make this happen on my own. I wasn't able to make it spread as far as I thought it should. And I was relying on all those parents who had signed up to do that. And eventually at the beginning of 2024, two of those parents put something on Instagram, and overnight it went crazy. Thousands and thousands of parents signed up. I heard about it on the news, and that was the birth of Smartphone Free Childhood, which we've heard about. And before I knew it, I was being interviewed myself, and it was in all the papers and everything. So Smartphone Free Childhood is all about just parents supporting each other with that dilemma, coming together in little groups locally. So tonight's event, I wanted to share information about the risks and the reasons behind that, and to give some tips. So with this presentation I'm going to do now, I'm just going to focus on the solutions for us as parents, but also how schools can play a role, and local community leaders, councils and things like that too. Hang on, I need this. Okay, so here's a quote from the Children's Commissioner for England, Rachel D'Souza, who says she thinks we'll look back in 20 years and be horrified at what our children have been exposed to. And this really struck me, so put it up there. And she was talking about some of the statistics that she'd seen through her work of the harms that were coming to children, particularly around sexual abuse online and grooming and things like that. How have we got into this situation? So all of us adults, when we grew up, we either didn't have phones, or if we did, they looked like that, a basic phone, and all it did was make phone calls and texts. But over the last sort of 15 years, these things have evolved together with social media, and now the two things are really combined. They've evolved together. Social media is designed to work on phones, and phones are designed for using social media. And it's crept up on us, and parenting hasn't really figured out how to deal with this. This is what we're talking about, is how we deal with this new technology. So when children first started getting smartphones, we didn't understand the impact. But what's changed in the last 2 or 3 years is actually now we do have a lot of research and a lot of evidence, some of which we've heard about tonight. I'm not going to go over it too much again, but just a couple of statistics. This one strikes me. Childhood outdoor accidents over the last 10 years have gone down by 70%. This is NHS data. Meanwhile, self-harm has increased by 93%. We know, someone mentioned earlier, we know that mental health outcomes are better the later that a child gets a smartphone. And this is the research data from Sapien Labs from 2023. So we have evidence for this stuff now. We didn't before. And I just wanted to show this to show the wide range of impacts. We've touched on a few of them, but really it goes far beyond just internet safety. It's not really the kind of thing you could just touch on with a normal school internet safety workshop. It goes into physical health, obesity, spine development, eyesight. People getting mugged for their phones is up. Road safety, because kids aren't looking properly when they're crossing the road. I mean, all sorts of things you might just have not thought about. We talked about the opportunity cost, buying drugs and weapons, sextortion, which is when somebody gets scammed to send money because somebody's got hold of a picture of them naked and that kind of thing. I mean, the number of kids getting sent nudes that they don't want, or being asked to send nudes, is just through the roof. So there's a huge range of impacts. It's become normal for children to have smartphones and social media, and these are the stats on that. 25% of 5 to 7-year-olds have their own smartphone, and by the age of 12, it's nearly 90%. Parents wish things were different. 94% of primary school parents think smartphones are harmful. 70% of parents believe they have a negative impact on family life. 33% of parents with children with smartphones have cried over their child's phone possession. Young people also wish things were different. This is from a Parent Kind poll. 67% of 16 to 18-year-olds think smartphones are harmful. 1 in 5 16 to 18-year-olds have felt life is not worth living due to social media. And 50% say they're addicted. So how have we got into this situation? Everyone's got one because everyone's got one. Most parents believe they're harmful, but as Ruth said, you know, we're trapped. If everyone else has got them, we don't want our kids to be the only ones left out. Simple. Same thing. So, solutions. First, I want to say that this has been around a while and we've had these solutions for a while. The statistics that I've shown, and there's loads of other statistics, they get worse and worse year on year. So these solutions that we've been using aren't really working. They're clearly not working. Education, regulation and parental controls. That doesn't mean we abandon them. We still need to do them, but we're not doing everything. So I want to talk about why these things aren't working. Education. So thinking about education, we've talked about the fact that these things are designed to be addictive. Behind every screen on your phone, you have 1,000 engineers working to make it maximally addictive. There was a thing called the TikTok experiment carried out by the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, 2023. They set up fake accounts pretending to be 13-year-old girls, and content about suicide was shown within just 3 minutes. Content about eating disorders was shown within 8 minutes, and vulnerable accounts had content about self-harm and eating disorders within every 39 seconds. So we know that these algorithms are dangerous. They're dangerous by design. So internet safety education is really important, but the problem it frames the problem as entirely one of misuse. It assumes that children just aren't using it properly, and if they were, everything would be fine. And that overlooks the fact that these apps are dangerous by design. So it puts an unfair expectation of responsibility on children for their own safety. Now, these things have to be age appropriate. You know, we've talked a lot about children as young as 6 and 5 owning smartphones. When we're talking about teenagers who are 16, 17, you know, we've got to have a different approach. Sorry, I really need a drink of water. Okay, so regulation. Again, it's important. We need regulation, but we've got regulation. We have an age limit on apps, 13, but it's widely ignored. Will regulation make enough of a difference? And when, if so, right? We've been talking about the Online Safety Act for years. People and companies might always find ways around it. And can it ever keep up with the rate of advancing technology? And there's implications for our freedom and security if we try and crack down on everything. Okay, 3, parental controls. We've touched on this. Why aren't they working? We still need to use them. We have to use them, but they're not the whole answer because they're challenging, they're complicated to set up. They're always changing, there's glitches, there's software updates, kids know how to bypass them quite easily, and they're limited in what they can do. They lead to arguments over screen time and more apps, and they can't protect children from each other's devices. So there's loads of limitations, but we still have to use them. 78% of parents weren't confident in setting adequate parental controls in 2023. 58% of teens say they've never had parental controls on their phone. 47% of teens have bypassed them. This is data for larks. I did a survey in 2024. Didn't obviously get all the parents in larks, but we had over 100 responses from different schools. The graph at the bottom there shows the different years that were surveyed. They're mostly primary schools. The vast majority of the results were from primary school. So for the whole survey, we can see 16% had phones with unrestricted access, no parental controls. In academy, all the responses showed 91% had no parental controls on their phones. So what else can we do? Well, we've talked about it already, haven't we? Parents working together. And I have to emphasize, we're all doing the best for our kids. So there's no judgment of parenting here. Everybody wants what's best for their kids and everybody's got different ways of doing things, okay? Of course, but we all have to try our best. And so the top tips are, if you haven't given your kid a phone already, if you can, consider delaying just as long as possible. The longer the better. But if they've already got a smartphone, then there's ways you can focus on healthy balances and staying safe. So for younger kids, you know, they'll tell you everyone else in the class has a phone, but just try and delay as long as possible. And the key thing is to talk to other parents, and you'll find out they haven't all got phones. And you can then, when you talk to each other, you can start taking action together. And importantly, you've got to model good habits as parents and just watch how we're using our phone, because kids pick up on that. Basic phones are available. I think there's a general lack of awareness that these things are out there. You can get a SIM card with just no data, just calls and texts. You can get an old Nokia. So our son has not an old Nokia, it's a new Nokia, but it's like an old phone. It just does calls and texts. It's a Nokia 105. There's other models like these, the Pinwheel or the Balance phone. They look like a smartphone, but they're totally restricted. There's also smart watches. So the key thing is, if your child has a phone, talk to them about it, talk to them about what they're doing online, understand how they feel, what they're doing, what they're seeing, have a good relationship with them. Talk to other parents too, so that you know what their kids are doing and how that might be affecting, how your kids might be affecting each other, and just conversations, everybody working together. Create screen-free spaces in your house or screen-free times. So, you know, try and avoid using phones at meal times, try and avoid having devices in bedrooms, that kind of thing. Use parental controls and filters, as I've mentioned, absolutely essential. Even though it's very challenging, doesn't always work, have to try. Encourage alternative activities, seems obvious, and you can change your mind. If you've already given them a phone, if things get really bad, you can change your mind and take it back. Even if they have a phone, you can still delay certain apps. You can block app downloads and you can delay social media use. You can reduce distractions by covering up the phone using a cover. You can install apps that kind of automatically reduce the distractions, and you can set screen time limits and apps. There's parental control software, there's free ones, there's expensive ones. We use Custodio at home, it's quite comprehensive. You have to keep on top of it all the time. But so there's a stepwise progression. First thing, delay when they first get a phone, consider giving them a basic phone first. And then from 14 onwards, you might give them a smartphone, but with restrictions. And from 16, try letting them have social media. These are suggestions, of course, you know, it's not prescriptive, but you can change it and you can move up and down. And you just give more responsibility and more freedom as they grow. So we have the power as parents to do this, and we have more power when we do this together, when we work together and talk to each other, but we're not telling everybody what to do or that they have to join us or anything. Like, we respect every parent's rights to choose, and you only need about a quarter of parents in a class or 25%, you know, within the community to delay together to really make a difference, to break that peer pressure. But the more people decide to do it, the easier it becomes. So I want to go on to how schools can help. The vision of Smartphone Free Childhood is parents supporting each other, supported by schools. And it really makes a difference when schools are on board. Where we see real success and really big numbers of parents delaying together, it's where schools have helped. Schools can show leadership in setting social standards and norms, and can provide information and guidance about the risks and the solutions. They can remind parents of the legal age of social media apps and support parents in the Parent Pact. Encourage the use of basic phones instead of smartphones through school policies. Implement smartphone-free schools where smartphones just aren't allowed to be brought into a school at all. And they can join the Smartphone Free Schools network. So smartphone free schools are schools where smartphones are just not allowed to be brought in at all. Particularly, this is usually primary schools, and for secondary schools, because this is quite new, secondary schools can introduce it from S1, so that new intake at S1 will never bring a smartphone to school, while older years at that in between can keep them stored or keep them out of sight. And schools can also issue parental guidance, advising parents to delay smartphones until at least 14. Smartphone-free secondary schools are twice as likely to be rated outstanding by Ofsted. And the Ormiston Academies Trust down in England has 45 schools and it's gone smartphone free. It says learning, behaviour and well-being are our top priorities at Ormiston. Smartphones are detrimental to all of these. I'm going to skip through some of these slides. This just shows what other areas are doing. In Scotland, we have more than 12 smartphone-free schools. Moray Council has a smartphone free policy across the whole of Moray. So that's 46 smartphone free primary schools, 8 secondary schools where they have to be kept off and away. In England, there's over 829 smartphone free schools and 10 local authorities that openly support smartphone free childhood. I'll show you what that kind of support looks like and what is possible and what really helps. So, for example, here in St Albans, a letter was sent from a consortium of all the primary schools to all the parents saying that children's phones do not need to have access to the internet to keep them safe, i.e. they can use a basic phone with no internet. And they encourage all parents to delay giving children a smartphone until they reach 14. And a similar thing in Enfield, encouraging parents to delay. So schools can take a view on this, and it really makes a difference, and positive results have been reported. Those teachers have said they've seen much better behaviour and kids interacting in a noisy playground. In Scotland, these decisions are left up to head teachers. The government emphasises head teachers' professional autonomy, which is fine. I personally believe that the government should take a position on this and give stronger guidance. But the fact is there's nothing stopping schools in Scotland from taking a position, issuing guidance to parents, or going smartphone free. So I'm going to stop there. Just want to say what Smartphone Free Childhood is about parents supporting each other, ideally supported by schools. Current approaches haven't really fixed this, and so what we need to do and what this is about is working together, parents communicating and working together collectively to solve this problem. It's not about judging each other or telling each other what to do or anything like that. So I'm going to end there. Thank you very much. Hopefully we've got a bit of time left. I'll try and do questions and answers and any kind of open discussion. So we're going freestyle. Does anybody have any questions or want to kick a discussion off? Did you get any questions on the WhatsApp? Oh, somebody. Hello.
School. I know from my experience when I was still in school, I had really bad eyesight and my phone was able to have this and stuff. So I feel like if I was still in school now and the phone bans were put in place, I feel like that's taken away from my learning. Because it was something that helped me learn visually because I could see out my photos, it's my phone maybe things I can see. Yeah. Even if I did have classes, I still can't really see out them properly. I can use my phone to actually physically see things that I can't see for myself. So I feel like if I was still through that, can we take away from how me being able to learn? Sure, yeah.
So, you know, there could be exemptions for medical conditions, surely. I don't see why not. Do you think that if you had said to your school that you had that issue and you know, if there was a ban and you said that you needed it, do you think they would have been receptive to that? No. Really? Okay, yeah, I mean, that's interesting.
Said that he consulted with mostly young people in school, like our head teacher, and he said no.
Just because it's going out on, have we got any people on Zoom?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Does anyone on the panel have an answer for that?
Any of the schools that have introduced, in any of the schools that have introduced smartphone bans, it's very normal for there to be a medical exemption for that. So obviously, children maybe with diabetes and these kind of things, and you know, Steph would know more about that than me, but I believe with any of those things where there's a genuine medical need to have these devices, and they are going to be beneficial to you either from a health perspective or an education perspective, then there obviously is an exemption there. But I think that has to be traded off with the very clear evidence that Julie was providing there around the level of distraction that everybody having a phone has. And obviously as a teacher, I can imagine if you've got a class full of 30 kids and they all have phones, it's very, very difficult. Whereas if you've got one or two who have a medical exemption and a right to use that phone, that makes it much, much easier. You don't have to try and monitor 30 phones and the potential misuse of those.
I taught many people between, 2005 and maybe 2015, before phones were really part of school, who were visually impaired in a range of, different severities, and there were obviously different workarounds then. I wonder if your smartphone helped you to access and see, but I don't know if it necessarily helped you to learn. It probably helped you to engage with the resources. I think probably if you were in school now, it might be a laptop or a tablet or different. We would find a workaround, but probably the screen, your phone, isn't actually potentially the best device in some ways. There are other technologies that perhaps we could look at to help you engage with the materials appropriately, as we've done for so many years before smartphones were in the classroom. But absolutely take your point. Obviously, you needed it to help you see, but there are probably different things that we could look at that would have supported your engagement.
Thank you. I wanted to make a point about consultation. You mentioned that these things have to be done in consultation with young people, and that's absolutely right. And I think they always are. No? Okay. Tell me about Garnet Valley. What happened?
A school ban happening in Garnet Academy, and there's been no consultation with the pupils.
Right, okay.
It's a relative issue. They just say there is going to be a full ban, and that was it. Going to involve the ban. So of course, it's not happened, but it was that whole, oh my goodness, we're just flying into the way it's been done. It's just flung at the young people, so they've not a chance to digest it and find the reason why information like this hasn't been imparted in them yet. So they've not got a full understanding. They're just like, oh my god, the phone's getting taken away. So I think that kind of maybe consultations are the right word, but it's conversations, giving them this information, this level of information, rather than assuming that, you know, I'm well aware of the developmental issues and things on what their primary age, but certainly the academy young people, I think they don't give them enough credit.
No, I mean, okay, that's interesting. They normally
giving them information and having those conversations.
Yeah. No,
Probably be better. You're getting them on board. You're tying them in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Forcing something.
So I mean, maybe that's an issue with this idea of head teacher autonomy, that, you know, head teachers can just do whatever they want. That's interesting. Usually these things are done in consultation, certainly at the local authority level. At the moment, there's a number of local authorities across Scotland doing consultations on this. North Ayrshire is one of them. But yeah, individual head teachers, I suppose, can theoretically do whatever they want. I wasn't aware of that. I haven't heard that. But no, absolutely, they should do these things in consultation. How you make that happen, if they're not, I don't know. Yeah.
These are the guns values.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to use a microphone because there's a few people on Zoom that might put me right off. Sorry. Any other questions? I mean, oh yeah, are you willing to use a microphone?
What do we know about what North Ayrshire Council are likely to do on this? Because they've obviously been consulting, but I mean, is there a process from here? Todd's speech was a bit vague.
Yeah, unfortunately, Todd has left us now because he had to get the boat. I don't know if there's any other representatives of North Ayrshire here who would like to say anything, because I personally can't speak to that.
You can.
Do you know anything about it?
No.
Can I first of all say that the presentations have been really first class, and the reason I came along tonight was to find out more about it. We got the email through from yourself telling us about it, and I thought, well, this is going to be very pertinent to North Ayrshire and to every secondary and probably every primary school as well. So the consultation will be ongoing. I'm not sure what's involved in it, but I was certainly keen enough to come and find out the views of, if you like, the panel, the experts, the parents, the professionals, and I think it's been very, very worthwhile. And I think we've all really learned quite a lot today. So what will happen in the future, I don't really know, but I know it's very much going to be on the agenda, because when you hear about some of the things that children are seeing on the internet, that really is very, very, very worrying, and the impact on them. And I know that in North Ayrshire over recent years we've had quite a number of young people who have committed suicide. I don't know the background to them all, but I know if people are seeing things like beheadings and pornography on the internet, violence, it will have a negative impact on their mental health and well-being. So it's very much on the agenda, and I think we should all be very, very aware of what's happening with our young folk and do our best to educate them and perhaps drive them away from looking at sites they really shouldn't be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, as far as the consultation goes, as far as I know, I was made aware of it back in May somehow, can't remember how. And a letter was sent out to parents from some schools. It came to my attention third hand through another parent from another area. Hasn't been sent to us. It was sent to parents from years P6 and above, and secondary, but we've got a child in secondary and we haven't received a letter, so I don't know why. It said it had to be completed by the 31st of October as well. So that's all I know. Okay, and for the benefit of people who might not have heard who are on Zoom, we have the Garnet Valley Youth Forum.
Yes.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. And if any of you do have anything to contribute, please do. Yes, would you willing to use this or? Excellent, thank you very much.
Yeah, my dad will come back later.
So I want to kind of touch on something that we talked, the thing that, Dad, yeah, I'll touch on, can I quickly leave and take this in the.
That's a good job.
That there's something in my head listening throughout this, and it was one of the things you were saying about you're involved in the industry that does this and algorithms and things like that. Why are we not tackling it at that level rather than trying to protect the children? Why are we not going after the big companies? Why are we not getting it at the root cause rather than, it's like everything else, you know, things like recycling and that, we go to the end user. Why not target the companies as well? What's being done to kind of regulate that, or why the government not kind of homing in on that rather than putting it back on the parents?
I think that is a fantastic question. Obviously the Online Safety Act went through the UK Parliament a couple of months ago now, and is due to be rolled out, which is meant to increase controls, age verification on pornography sites and things like that. However, the balance of that is similar to this situation where we're saying we should have consultation, but we also need to make quicker decisions at times. And I do wonder if there's been an incident that's driven that decision that's been taken in Garnet. The problem with the regulation coming down from the top is twofold. It is that the length of time it takes for these things to come through, all of the technology is moving on in the meantime. So the things that we are legislating against are the problems that were facing our children 3 years ago. They're not the problems that they're going to be facing by the time this act comes into play. The companies that are building these apps, are building these devices and selling them all to us, are some of the largest companies in the world. I think I was looking at something just before we came out there. The US economy, in the stock market in the US, 30% of the value of the entire stock market is in 7 companies, and of them, Google, Apple and Meta are right up there. And that is the problem. It's the same as the hold that the tobacco companies used to have. The level of investment, our governments are invested in stock shares that will be impacted by those companies. And ultimately, that does affect decision making. Companies, governments want investment in their countries. They want jobs. They want these. And if you are seen to be pushing too hard against that, you are essentially reducing investment. So it's a really, really complex problem. And there is money behind it. Essentially, that is what's happening. I think it was really interesting, one of the stats about, some children, some young people are spending 37.5 hours a week on their phones. That is the equivalent of a full-time job. But what that actually is slave labor for Meta, TikTok, whichever company, Meta owns Facebook and Instagram, and whichever company that is, that's what our children are doing. Our children are generating revenue for these big businesses. And the problem, as I said, is that even when we do start to wake up at the government level and start to legislate against that, the algorithms and the apps are moving so quickly that things have changed. So when that Online Safety Act started going through, there were no AI overviews on Google. Now, when you go and search on Google, those AI overviews are there. There's nothing about those in the Online Safety Act, because they didn't exist when it started to come through Parliament, and that will always be the case, which is why we do need to think more about it as a kind of behavioural and cultural piece, as well as a legislation piece, I think. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just add that we are doing those things as well. So it's about all these different solutions. Regulation is one, education as well, controls and parents taking action. Sorry, somebody wanted to say something.
So the thing I was going to say, look, I have to say this really quickly. It's touching on like health kind of things again. We were kind of confirmed before the summer holidays that people that had like physical health problems were going to be able to get like people with diabetes were going to be able to have their phones, but people that had mental health things were being more dismissed. Like I have autism and I rely on my phone and music to help me calm down when I'm overstimulated or understimulated. And they have not came up with any form of solution, to the point where I've had to take action and spend some of my parents' money getting a new device that isn't a phone, just so that I can have the accommodations I need. And other people are having to talk to like 7 different people about their own mental health issues before they can get to the office to contact like their parents. And we have like no way of like getting our phones to be able to do things like those.
Thank you. Is anyone able to speak to that? Stephanie, Pat? Things up. Get
When it would come to kind of mental health problems or physical health problems that were impacting on education, we actually in primary care aren't really involved in that necessarily. There can be kind of team around the child meetings, which are kind of multidisciplinary team meetings where specific issues can be brought up and certain people are invited, and the kind of concerns are raised and solutions. The concerns are raised and the solutions to be given at that point. So it wouldn't really be in primary care or with the GP necessarily, although sometimes it's very for us to be involved or be invited. But it would be more around the child meeting with the different people involved in the school. Yeah.
I guess it's about that.
But it's that holistic approach for the child. It's not just a yes or no. So there's and they should be involved in that, and their family could be involved in that, and their teachers and their guidance teachers, and
Sounds like in Ghana there was no process. It's just been okay. Thank you. We're going to have to wrap things up because we said we'd finish by 8:30. Has anyone else got any burning questions or comments? No? Okay. Fantastic. Thank you everybody so much. Thank you.